I don't know if you've noticed, but there's been a bit of a Hannibal renaissance lately. I think it's because the show was recently put on Netflix and thus made available for the general public who, one, hadn't seen it before, or two, saw it when it was first airing and are now itching for a rewatch. So there's been an influx of Hannibal, Will Graham, Hannah Graham content, of course. But it's a dark show about cannibalism and destruction and love. So there's also going to be lots of content about that. I can't scroll through Twitter without seeing another Hanagram fan cam or photo set about all-consuming love, love that destroys you, love that eats you alive. By the way, if you'd like a good in-depth video about the idea of destructive love and why we root for it, check out this great video by Radhika. It's fascinating. I'll link it below. And while I'm not going to be talking about Hannibal today, I am going to be diving deeper into this phenomenon of consumption in media, of hunger and appetite, of cannibalism. Raw is the story of a girl who's been a lifelong vegetarian until, upon undergoing a hazing ritual for veterinary school where she's forced to eat raw meat, she discovers she has a taste for it that only grows stronger and more volatile with time. A part of the hazing ritual is that all of the veterinary students must eat raw rabbit kidneys. Justine is obviously uncomfortable with this because she's a lifelong vegetarian, never even ingested a bite of meat before in her life. There are two upperclassmen conducting the hazing, and one of them relents and seems like he'll let Justine off the hook on account of her dietary restrictions. But the other upperclassman is actually Justine's older sister, Alexia, and she refuses to let her off the hook, eventually just forcing the raw meat into Justine's mouth. Justine's roommate, Adrian, walks her out as she gags on the taste. Later that night, Justine develops a strange rash on her skin. The school nurse tells her it must be a reaction to something she ate, aka the raw meat, and gives her a cream to treat it. But the strange reactions don't stop there. Justine begins craving meat, develops a unique appetite for it. She starts off satisfying it with gas station meat, which then escalates to raw chicken in the morning, which you wouldn't think of as a trope, but weirdly happens more often than you might think. I think there's just something about a woman in a feral state of mind eating raw chicken straight out of the refrigerator that just speaks to us. We'll come back to this trope later in the video. Anyway, Justine is eating raw meat to satisfy her cravings, but the cravings are just getting stronger and stronger. It escalates when her sister, Alexia, is giving her a bikini wax in her dorm room. While there, by the way, Justine finds the same skin cream that the nurse had given her in her sister's cabinet. The waxing process is understandably a little painful and laborious, and when Alexia messes up and tries to just cut the wax off Justine with a pair of scissors, Justine reflexively kicks her away, causing Alexia to accidentally cut her own finger off. Alexia passes out. Justine is freaked out, of course, but goes over to her sister's dismembered finger and takes a taste, and finds that she likes it. Alexia wakes up to the sight of her sister eating her severed finger, but when their parents ask what happened, she tells them that their dog ate it. The parents are horrified, and their dog is put down because, according to the girl's father, once an animal gets a taste of human flesh, it will only want more. Justine is confused why Alexia hid the truth about what happened, and Alexia takes Justine to a relatively empty road. They wait until a car comes driving down it, which is when Alexia runs out in front of it, making the driver swerve around her at the last second and causing the car to veer into a tree, killing both passengers upon impact. And then Alexia starts to eat one of our crash victims. She explains that she's simply trying to teach Justine. She hopes she'll learn from the experience. Justine is disgusted and feels guilty not only for her meat cravings, but also for the fact that she's developed a taste for flesh. Understandable. She begins to desire her roommate, Adrian, carnally. Sorry, I couldn't resist. When they end up having sex, instead of biting into him as she wants to do, she bites into her own arm instead, deep enough that she's bleeding, thereby satisfying her lust for him in both senses, at least for now. I won't spoil the whole movie, but suffice it to say, the coming-of-age aspect of Raw centers on Justine's newly awakened desire for flesh. The flesh itself is honestly secondary to Justine's desire for it. This hunger represents something that, to her, is new, dangerous, and dirty. Not just dirty, but taboo, and try as she might to suppress it, supplement it, or avoid it, it keeps rearing its ugly head. It's the itch that won't go away and that'll never be quite satisfied. An interesting aspect of the movie is Justine's relationship with her sister, because Justine is not awakened to this new aspect of her life on her own. She is essentially forced into it by her sister, who pressured her to eat the meat as a part of the hazing, knowing what it would do to her, since it did the same thing to her. I think there's something to be said for refusing to suffer alone. You might think Alexia is selfish for dragging Justine into this world of warped desire and appetite, but throughout the movie, it's clear that Alexia is not very ashamed of this side of herself. She even taunts Justine at a party with an arm stolen from a morgue, obviously unafraid of being recorded doing so. In my perspective, Alexia is not trying to drag Justine down to her level. Alexia, on some level, feels freed by giving into her desire for flesh. Until she'd had the first taste of meat, she'd never known that kind of hunger that was so guttural and, well, raw, you could say. And the satisfaction she likely felt upon quenching that desire for flesh was probably freeing for her in a way she'd never even thought possible. By awakening Justine's appetite for flesh, she wasn't trying to drag Justine down to her depths, because frankly, she didn't think of her desires as depraved at all. She was trying to open her sister up to how delicious giving into your base desires can be. In the case of Raw, cannibalism was akin to letting go of your inhibitions and losing yourself to your desires. But that's just scratching the surface of what cannibalism can represent. In The Neon Demon, it goes beyond the taboo ideas of eating flesh and more about what the flesh can do for you. Out of the 3 movies I'll be discussing, this one is the least explicitly about cannibalism. It's more of a secondary or even tertiary element to the story, but it was significant enough that I thought it was worth including. Jessie is an aspiring model who moves to LA after the death of her parents. Upon arriving, she is thrust into an unfamiliar world of overly enthusiastic photographers, jealous fellow models, and catty industry people, all eager to see what this pretty girl from the Midwest has to offer. Almost universally, everyone Jessie meets is entranced by her natural, innocent beauty. It gets her signed to a modeling agency and immediately scheduled with top photographers for shoots, further irritating her veteran model coworkers, Sarah and Gigi. It's no secret that the modeling world can be cutthroat and brutal, and as pretty as you are, as uniquely enchanting as you may think you are, there's always going to be someone who's the next big thing, or just someone riding on mommy's coattails. While Jessie begins the movie as down-to-earth and innocent, over the course of the story, she becomes more jaded and self-obsessed, saying things like, being the most sought-after and in-demand model, it's everything. It's after this scene that we get our first brush, or taste, you could say, of flesh eating. Jessie's hand is bleeding, and instead of bandaging it, Sarah lunges forward and tries to drink the blood out of her palm. The instinct to suck the blood out of a cut isn't all that strange, even though you probably shouldn't do it. It's probably really unsanitary. But it's usually like a paper cut or something and not like a gaping wound. It's really weird, and it's also framed that way, as in Jessie also thinks it's really weird. And it's our first inkling as the audience that something weirder is going on here. Something about how desired Jessie is and how admired she is goes beyond just the typical like or admiration for someone that you think is beautiful or talented. The fact that it's Jesse's fellow model, Sarah, that is trying to basically ingest her body, her flesh, portrays something that's more visceral, more desperate than you might expect. It's just a little prequel to the kind of depraved things that they will do later on in the movie to get just a taste of the success and admiration that Jesse is receiving. In Neon Demon, the idea of ingesting Jesse's flesh is, again, less about the flesh itself and more about the idea of consuming a young, beautiful, and innocent girl whole. It's a commentary about how cutthroat the industry can be, how cyclical and cruel the world of modeling and entertainment is, and how talent cannibalizes talent. In a world where young, pretty girls are constantly pitted against one another, they can never truly thrive because they're always just going to be bringing themselves down like this. And if they don't, even if they try and mind their own business, there's no guarantee that someone else won't be the one bringing them down, cutting them up, and eating them alive. So far, we've seen how cannibalism can be an allegory for both how delicious and dangerous giving into your deep-seated desires can be. But our last movie is more about the dangers of what can happen when those desires remain unfulfilled. Aamis, or The Ravening, is a 2019 Indian Assamese language film about Nirmali, a lonely wife, mother, and pediatrician, and her relationship with Suman, a PhD student who belongs to an interesting club on his college campus. They meet when Suman shows up to Nirmali's clinic because his friend is sick from eating too much meat. Nirmali is a pediatrician, but Suman explains that no other clinics nearby are open and this is an emergency. While Nirmali checks on his friend, Suman explains that his friend is normally a vegetarian but wanted to take advantage of his parents being out of town to gorge himself on as much meat as he wanted. And he came to Suman and his friends because they're in a meat club where they sample unique types of meat that people don't typically eat as a part of their diets, focusing specifically on diets from the northeast of India. After this initial meeting, the two begin to meet up more and more, with Suman bringing Nirmali new meat dishes to try, and Nirmali happily welcoming a change of pace in her normally mundane and lonely routine. Over the course of the movie, it's clear that they're both developing a deeper and more intimate relationship with one another, but they're always very careful never to cross that line. A narrative point of contrast in the film is Nirmali's friend, Jumi, who is having a full-blown extramarital affair. Multiple times, Jumi teases Nirmali about the possibility of her and Suman having something more than their innocent friendship, and every time Nirmali rejects the idea wholeheartedly. When Nirmali's husband comes back from out of town, he works as a Doctors Without Borders type of thing, but for rural villages in India. She even invites Suman to their home for a dinner party, almost as if to say, "See, there's nothing for me to hide. He's just a friend, and I'm even introducing him to my husband." A scene that sticks out to me in particular that really defines their relationship is when Suman takes Nirmali out to try bat meat. I'll play the scene for you here. This scene, for me, perfectly encapsulates the thesis of desire within the movie and how the consumption of flesh plays into that. They both clearly want to cross that line here, to go beyond these carefully constructed roles that they've boxed themselves into, but they'll never let themselves do it. Nirmali adheres too strongly to societal expectations, and Suman would never do anything to upset that either. This is where the flesh comes in. I won't spoil how exactly the cannibalism plays into the plot because I wholeheartedly recommend that you go watch the movie for yourself to see. But what I will say is that whereas the consumption of flesh in both Raw and the Neon Demon represented giving up and giving in to your baser desires, in the case of Aamis, it represents the opposite. For Nirmali and Suman, their mutual desire for one another is suppressed, and their repression manifests in the consumption of meat. There's actually a great article discussing the elements of repression and cannibalism in both Raw and Aamis, written by RISHIJA SINGH, that I'll link below. I'll also quote a bit from it here. One can call Aamis a story of desire through meat, while Raw is a story of desire for meat. The major difference between Nirmali and Justine is that of the society that they inhabit. The former considered sexual digression worse than cannibalism, because the way sex, and more specifically adultery, is treated in our society makes it seem like the most egregious crime one can commit, while the latter had recourse to indulge in guiltless sexual escapades in the hypersexual environment that she inhabited. Justine chose to repress her animal instinct to come out as more humane. Nirmali chose to repress her human instincts to come out as more animalistic. In the end, both of them give us a lesson on desire and how to, or not to, handle it. So the next time you're scrolling through your preferred social media platform and you see another post about all-consuming love or repressed desire, take a second to pause and ask yourself, what does the meat represent here? What is the cannibalism supposed to tell me? I promise it's not as weird as it sounds. Also, please watch Aamis, directed by Bhaskar Hazarika. This whole video was honestly inspired by the movie and how much I wanted to talk about it. It was that good. I wouldn't even say it's very graphic, and definitely not as graphic as the first two films I discussed. It's more of a quiet, chilling watch. Let me know what you think. By the way, if you're interested in supporting my channel while also getting a little something cute for yourself, I do have some merch. It's very cute and discreet. I've gotten a few pictures from some of you who've received your orders and you all look so good in it. I'm obsessed. Another way to support is through my Patreon, which, by the way, we got our first bougie Bepsi patron, who I will be verbally shouting out at the end of every video. So thank you, Hariana Hook. I actually love your channel, so I kind of fangirled when I saw it was you who pledged. So thank you. This is kind of awkward for me to plug because I feel kind of old doing it, but I did make a TikTok if you want to follow me on there. I'm just as charming and funny on there as I am on here, but I'm just confined to 60 seconds, so it's probably ideal if you have a shorter attention span. If TikTok's not your thing, that's cool. I also got Twitter and a letterbox, which I'm trying to use regularly to update on movies that I'm watching throughout the year. Yeah, all right. Thanks for watching. Oh wait, and don't forget to like the video.